Am I making the right decision? Sometimes it feels like what I've decided to do is the right choice, but I still can't help but wonder if that's really the case. It's imperative I take you on this trip down memory lane so you'll understand exactly where I'm coming from. I met my charming husband when he was really not financially buoyant. He had little to no monetary value, as they say. Well, the thing is, he was the kind of person who needed to work really hard to make ends meet, but I didn't really care about that. On the other hand, I was what you call a trust fund baby. My parents left behind a sizable amount of money for my sister and me, and also a very, very beautiful house. Anyways, I met Frank and I fell head over heels in love with the man. He was everything I wanted and was willing to give me the world. We connected on a deep level, maybe because we were in the same age grade. I really don't know, but all I know is we loved each other to a fault. Our love was intoxicating, blinding, sweet in every sense of the word. Too good to be true, as they say. It was beautiful times. People around us felt like he loved me for my money, but truthfully, I don't think my husband knows how much I'm really worth. He just knows I was left with some cash. We heard rumors around us, especially at the time we got engaged. People kept saying that I'd be disrespecting of a wife because I have money and Frank would be a gold-digging husband with no real love for me. But all this just made our love even stronger. We were tired of the side talk, so we decided to have a very private wedding ceremony. It felt like an impulsive decision to others because there was no bachelorette party, after party, or even a bridal train. But to us, we just thought that we could not have exchanged our vows sooner. I was such a happy bride. I finally had a man I could call my husband, somebody to be there for me all the time. It felt so real, and I had to keep reminding myself it was real. A little while after our wedding, my husband moved in with me. We did almost everything together, and it felt so good. After a few months of bliss and sweetness, I noticed my husband was acting like a little bit shady. He would work late, rather spend his weekends and off days at the office, always keeping his mobile phone away from my sight, and whenever we eventually went out together, not less than 3 women would smile or wave at him. It was quite disturbing, but mind you, my husband was still very loving towards me, so I didn't really think much about it. I mean, I know he's a very nice guy, so he's just being a friendly neighbor to all the people that say hi to him when we're out, especially because he's new to this area. Also, it would not help if I became paranoid when there's a possibility that nothing is wrong at all. Not long after I made peace with the fact that my husband was only being nice and welcoming, we had a new neighbor, just 2 houses away from ours on the opposite side of the street. I know this because I was out watering my garden on a bright sunny afternoon when the moving company brought the furniture and suitcases. I didn't even know what exactly would be staying in the house because I wasn't interested in the neighborhood gossip. This new neighborhood, however, had other plans. See, we bumped into each other when I was taking a walk in the evening later that day. I had a good look at her and she was beautiful, but in the sultry sense. She was a redhead and had a very flattering shape. Her lips looked really soft and she had what I would call ocean eyes. If I were to describe her with just one word, I would choose sensual. We made small talk, but I wasn't really interested, so I brought an end to it. Turns out her name is Charlene, and she was a very single woman. Woman, I say, very much so, because she was dressed rather provocatively, more like saying she was single and ready to mingle. I'll state now that I did not hate her, but I also did not fancy anything about her. Barely 2 weeks after bumping into Charlene, I came home from a little engagement at the bank and walked into my home to meet a disbelieving sight. Right in front of me was my husband in bed with none other than Charlene. Saying I was shocked would be an understatement of the year. I was completely dumbfounded. I couldn't even move, nor could I utter a single word. The next thing I knew, my husband is pleading. He said Charlene forced herself on him when all he did was be a caring neighbor. He turned to her and yelled at her, and he asked her to leave our home, and she did. I was disgusted by what I saw, and part of me hoped that my husband was too. After she left, my husband started begging and making promises. He told me how he innocently gave her a lift on his way to work, and how she has been on his case ever since then. He looked so pathetic, and I was wondering how we got here. Lots of questions were running through my mind, but I could not even dwell on a particular one for long enough to create a concrete conversation. Finally, I calmly told him that I need one thing from him, and that was for him to change the sofa set, most especially the one that had traces of Charlene. He gets up and ran to get his phone, and he called a showroom. They sent their last catalog, and my husband asked for my input on our new sofa set. When all of this was finally settled, he ordered my favorite meal for dinner, and we were in silence. It was time for bed, and he came in to pick a blanket and a pillow, and he used that opportunity to kneel and ask for my forgiveness on his knees. He made promise upon promise about how he'll cherish and love me forever, yada yada yada, and every other thing he thought I wanted to hear. Honestly, I wasn't even interested because I was still trying to process what happened that day. I was very mute, but this did not deter my husband, and he kept talking. I was mute, but my brain wasn't, and I remembered all the people that told me that my husband would hurt me, but I was adamant that he would not, and here we are. My brain, it was working into overdrive, so I had to say something. I calmly asked him to give me details, and because he was anxious to get in my good grace, he began to talk immediately. I was already thinking about how I can forget about this entire ordeal and try to move on when he foolishly said I didn't even finish. What? Do you mean I should congratulate on that, buddy? Was I supposed to feel elated when he said those words without realizing my husband just dunked gas on an already raging fire of gaslighting? I would not have any issue if he eventually stayed in the same room with me that night, but immediately after he said those stupid words, I stood up and pushed him out. I went ahead and banged the door in his face for good measure. Well, guys, the next morning, after a night of tossing, turning, and thinking, I resolved that I would not let people laugh at me or my marriage, so I decided just to let it all go. Mind you, I say let it all go, but that doesn't mean I actually did forgive him. Then again, my husband had no idea about my decision, so I enjoyed all the attention that he gave me, trying to act right and prove that he was the best husband. I enjoyed watching him run around the house trying to do things that he thought would please me, all in a bid to atone to his mistakes. Each time I looked at his eyes, I could feel him asking if he was forgiven. I didn't care what he thought. He brought this upon himself. However, a month later, Charlene forced her way into my home when I opened it slightly to ask what she wanted. I swear I had a mini heart attack when she said that she was carrying my husband's child. Because I couldn't recover. She stomped away with the promise of returning to give the good news to my hubby herself. I was also anticipating my husband's return, and he finally got home and was surprised to see me seated in the dark. Well, almost immediately. There was a knock on the door, and when he went to check who it was, Charlene barged in again, and this time she tells my husband exactly what she had told me, but with something extra. She made it crystal clear to him that the child support was non-negotiable, and that he should start getting ready because she would keep the baby no matter what we said, and then she left. My husband turned to me, and I could see the fear on his face. It was that visible, but it did not stop me from saying, "Turns out you actually did finish." I walked away, but he followed me to the bedroom, trying to tell me to stand by him in this trying time. Guys, he did not even deny or maybe doubt that the baby was his. He just accepted it. Well, my husband asked to understand that this was Charlene's plan all along. Get pregnant and get paid, baby, to fund her lifestyle. He kept telling me that she came on to him, but I don't know if it's true. You're a grown man. Don't you know how to say no? Why didn't you cut off ties when she started moving funny towards you? I didn't even believe that this was the first encounter, but then I didn't even want to find out if it was or wasn't. I told him to start working harder because although I love him, I wasn't going to pay child support on behalf of my husband, and definitely not from the money my parents left me. He told me that he has a brilliant plan that'll make our lives better, a plan that'll take us away from this bizarre fiasco into an era of peace and quiet. I didn't believe it, but I asked him to tell me, and of course I was a bit curious. He began to tell me this elaborate yet simplified plan on how we would fake getting a divorce, and then he would fake his death. But in reality, he would go somewhere he's not known, and he suggested my country house. He went ahead to say that I'd mourn for him, and after a considerable time I can sell our current home and travel down to meet with him. I asked him how exactly that would benefit us, And he said that most importantly, we would be free from Charlene, and then we could start over with our marriage. No more mistakes, nothing but true love. This idea is really tempting, but is it right to do? I don't know. I mean, come on. In my heart, I've made a decision, but I still don't know if it's the right one. I would be going ahead with my husband's plan, I guess. I know. I'm not hurting anyone, but I still can't help but wonder, do you think the decision would be correct to listen to my husband and follow through with the plan? Let me know what exactly you would do. Update number 1. Hey guys, I'm back with an update, and things are about to get a bit weird. Well, it's been about 5 months, and I'll tell you that this is not really easy. Let me start off by telling you that Frank is dead, at least to those who know us. When I agreed to go through with this, I thought that we would have wrapped up this drama in about 5 to 6 weeks, but it took way longer. My husband and I have been so busy ever since Charlene decides to sink her fingers and soil my marriage. When I made the decision and shared it with my husband, he was so relieved that he would not be doing this alone. He made promises that I hoped he would keep. One good thing about it all was that it brought me and my husband closer, although to the neighbors, we were acting like cat and dog, owing to the fact that we had open arguments and did not go anywhere together. This was because we wanted rumors of our unhappy home and imminent divorce to travel as far as possible. I guess Charlene was the happiest about the arguments my husband and I always had. I'm pretty sure she was actively involved in slandering our name and spreading gossip. She was quite happy flaunting her baby bump, and very quickly to point out that my husband was the father. Still, I didn't hate her. I was just sad that things got out of hand. We started getting visits from a lawyer, courtesy of my husband, and I did not want more drama, so I just went with it, until Charlene came to serve a court summon order to my husband, and we knew it was about to get serious. From that day, my husband started putting the finishing touches to his grand plan. Every 2 days, he would call his people to confirm that they knew exactly what role they would be playing, and he was satisfied nobody was slacking. My husband kept asking me to be strong for what was about to come, and I was. I had no other choice, did I? The court proceedings started, and it was tough. We hired a very spectacular lawyer, but he really worked for his money. It wasn't easy, but it was definitely clear to see that the court would rule in favor of Charlene, and at that moment, when I had the realization, I was glad my husband came up with this crazy plan of faking his death. It was clear that Charlene had taken a bite and was ready to leave the table. It was draining going to court every week, and I wanted to stop, but my husband advised against it. He wanted us to look like a perfect couple who did not mind paying child support to Charlene. That is, until a tragedy would make that impossible. Ha! Tragedy. I find it a little disconcerting that my husband was handling the situation so well. It just made me wonder if he would ever have done something like this before. I thought he would be shaky or absolutely, remorseful, but that simply was not the case. The only time I saw a fraction of remorse on his face was when we were seated in court, which made me conclude that he was just doing it for show. He may be cheating and lying of a husband, but one thing I know is that he is an absolute great actor. Well, the court proceedings dragged on for about 2 months in time until it finally came to a conclusion. The final court appearance was 2 days away, and my husband had this electric energy around him. I guess you could call it the finishing act before he moves on to a better life. He was anticipating, but I was queasy about it all, coupled with the fact that I'd be left alone for some months. Anyways, we were already halfway through with it. No going back. Today was the appointment day. I arrived at the courthouse alone. I wore a bright smile on my face and was quick to let anyone who inquired that my husband would be here soon because he was fixing the car since it suddenly developed a fault, and I had to hail a taxi. It sounded true because no one ever plans when their car might likely develop a fault. Just before we were ushered into the courtroom, I get a phone call, and I received devastating news that my husband was involved in a very bad accident. I let out a scream and rushed out of the court. When I arrived at the scene, I was told my husband was already on his way to the hospital via ambulance, but with the amount of blood I was staring at, I couldn't help but fear the accident was real. Eyewitnesses claimed that he died on the spot. Whatever stunt Frank pulled must have been really convincing. I've not heard from him and I feel really uneasy and can't sleep even though it's 2 in the morning. I just hope everything goes as planned. Update number 2. I feel hurt. I honestly feel worse than a fool. I've been cheated on all this while, and it's been 13 months since my last update, but I finally arrived at my country house after spending a little over 7 months mourning my husband. A very peculiar thing happened immediately after news about my husband's death filtered around the neighborhood. Charlene! Well, she got rid of the baby almost 4 months into the pregnancy. It was quite shocking when I heard it, but then again, the reason she became pregnant in the first place was mainly because of the child support. And since the father of the child was no more, I guess she realized she can't take on the extra responsibility all by her lonesome. My neighbors were kind enough to pay me a condolence visit at different times, and during those times I remained in character, acting heartbroken over my husband's death. I was a model widow, crying and mourning, always indoors and staying away from anything remotely fun. I mean, that was what the neighbors saw and believed. Although at night, I usually replayed the events of the day of the accident, and I remembered how bloody the scene was. How I received an anonymous call explaining that my husband was safe, but he had been taken to the morgue where a corpse was already made available. The body was wrangled beyond recognition and was a perfect cover-up. Burial arrangements were made and began almost immediately. People were really sympathetic to me, and 0 questions were asked about the hasty brutality of the burial. I spent some months living in isolation and playing the role of a grief-stricken widow. In my opinion, I played that role to perfection. All the while, I hired a realtor to help me put my house up for sale, and she did not disappoint. She was a great person and did not ask too many questions. She found me a buyer, and that chapter was absolutely just complete. I was very happy because I would finally be joining my darling husband and my sister Sarah over at the country house. This thought brought me such joy, and I was visibly glowing from ear to ear because I reasoned that this would be the beginning of a blissful marriage with my hubby. Away from the drama, away from the stress. It was this thought that kept me going all the while. When I finally arrived at my country house, the atmosphere was nothing like I imagined. My sister, she looked gloomy. She didn't even crack a smile, not once. My husband, on the other hand, was nonchalant. I asked if he knew what was wrong, and he said he did not. I took my sister aside and asked her what the matter was. The pieces of information she shared with me was absolutely heartbreaking. Are you guys ready? She told me she's been diagnosed with a very serious ailment and needed surgery as soon as possible. She told me how her resources have been depleted because of this ailment. I could see the fear in her eyes. I volunteered to help out with the surgery. I even volunteered to go with her, but she blatantly refused, saying the surgery was to be done in another state and that I should spend some time with my hubby since I'm just returning. You know, that was really selfless of her, and although I did not mind going with her to another state for her surgery, I respected her wishes. Somehow I thought my husband would be all over me the moment I returned, but instead he was acting cold and withdrawn. I asked him several times what the issue was, and he said he's fine. I thought nothing of it and let him be. Exactly 3 days after my sister left for surgery, I stumbled upon a text that she sent to my husband. I stared at it in disbelief. She clearly stated that she wants my husband to join her as fast as he can, so they can get married before the baby arrives. Turns out my sister and my husband, they're in love. I knew what the text meant, but I just could not make sense of it. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, so I kept quiet. I mean, what it was is an elaborate prank, right? Then again, what if this is real? I went through all the conversations from the past 7 months, and since they were living together, there wasn't much, but it was enough to get a rough idea of what's been going on behind my back. I can't even think straight. I have no idea exactly how to deal with this situation. This is crazy. Do you guys know? Update number 3. Hey, it's been a month since my last update. I have spent most of it wondering how I would navigate this problem and come out smelling like roses. I didn't want to stress myself anyway, so I began to brainstorm. At the same time, I couldn't believe what exactly was happening. My dearest sister, whom I love immensely, was pregnant with my darling husband's child. My darling husband, who made promises to me about how he'll be the best and will live in harmony without any drama. I wouldn't have guessed something as scandalous as this would be the part of my life from now on, but here we are. I kept asking myself what I would have done to deserve this kind of betrayal from two people I love dearly. Why me? Was this some sort of karmic retaliation or what? I couldn't believe it at first, but the text that I saw clearly showed that my husband and sister had become lovers during this time I was alone and supposed to mourn my husband's death. Well, their love had waxed so strong that they had already fixed a date for their private wedding. This news was very bitter to digest, but I had no other choice than to act calmly because I had a very carefully laid out plan. And I wasn't going to let something as trivial as anger just ruin it. My husband finally decided to talk to me. The first thing he told me was that he would be traveling for a while because he stumbled upon a job opportunity. Well, I knew that was a blatant lie the minute he finished his mouth, but I played along. I begged him to stay with me. I tried to convince him to wait a while before getting a job so he could spend some time with me. Owing to the fact that we've been away from each other for about a year. He didn't even let me finish my statement. He lashed out angry and said that I should stop acting so needy and clingy. He accused me of not wanting him to be the man of the house, to fulfill his duty as a husband. He went ahead to say I enjoyed having him under my wing just because I'm the one with money stashed away somewhere. As soon as he uttered those words, I knew everything had finally come to an end. I knew there was nothing else to salvage from this relationship, and I began to prepare my mind to detach it from him with as little damage and mental health damage as possible. I walked away. Talking to him in that state would yield nothing, and there was no changing his mind because he sounded very adamant. Late at night, I went to meet my hubby. I apologized and told him I fully understand his point. I took it a step further and offered to cover his travel expenses to show how much I support him. Well, that took away the tension between us, but did not take away my knowledge of what was about to happen on this trip. This was the trip that would make my sister a wife to my husband. After my husband embarked on this journey, I also embarked on a little trip of my own. You may not approve of it, but it had to be done. So I paid a visit straight to Charlene. Don't judge me. As I said, it had to be done. I thought long and hard about this step before I followed through. I looked for Charlene and found out that she was still residing in the former neighborhood. We met for lunch and I could tell that she was not really thrilled to see me, but after I spilled the juicy information I brought with me, I could tell that she was hooked on phonics. I told her we would both be playing by my husband, as I just found out that he was still alive and about to get married to my sister, who he impregnated. Charlene screamed. She visibly showed her displeasure, like right away, I mean. She didn't even care that people were staring in our direction, and she told me she was upset about it all, but more furious on my behalf, because I was the original victim in all this drama. She used this opportunity to ask my forgiveness for being a homewrecker, and I readily forgave her. When she asked if I knew the venue of the private wedding, I proved it and gave it to her immediately. She was livid, but it did not stop her from making me a promise. She swore that she would make my husband pay for his transgression. Mission accomplished. All that remains is for me to sit back, relax, and watch how this chaos will unfold. Final updates. Hey guys, it's been 5 long months since my last update, and I must say I was very, very impressed with how Charlene handled it. I loved every bit of the drama. More so, I loved that the only thing I did was seek Charlene out and spilled the beans. She handled everything else, and I loved it. After I met up with Charlene, she tells me that she would drive down to the wedding venue, which was in another state, the state my sister was supposed to get her surgery done. I couldn't let her go through that stress, so I offered to pay for her flight and accommodation. Mostly because the delay in arrival could give her a chance to change her mind or reduce the intensity of the drama. However, I doubted that would happen because Charlene looked like a woman scorned, and you know what they say about that. Charlene started making plans, but I did not ask for details. All I knew was that her entire energy was focused on my hubby and his deceitful conduct. I was all for the drama that was about to take place, but I needed some refreshments. I went to the shopping spree. I ordered a mouth-watering gourmet meal. Basically, I engaged in activities that would take my mind off the betrayal from my hubby and sister, and at the same time gave me a sense of normalcy. See, I realized that I have lived my life the past year and a half moving mountains for a man that would not even crush an anthill or hold my hand in love. I was done with that life, and nothing would change my mind at this point on. On the day of the wedding, I arrived at the chapel wearing a summer dress and a wide-brim hat that obscured part of my face. For a private wedding, security was crap. Did my husband forget that he had wronged some people, or did he think that he was invincible? I looked at my sister and could not help but feel pity for her. You see, she didn't really know exactly who she was about to spend the rest of her life with, and at that moment I remembered all the warnings that came my way concerning my marriage to my husband in the first place. If only I had listened to those. Maybe my life would be at a complete different level now, no matter. It was definitely too late to dwell on the past. I just wanted to move on and keep this behind me. Just as the vows were to be exchanged, we heard some commotion outside. A couple of cars skid to an abrupt stop and doors were slamming. All the eyes were on the giant oak door, and through it strutted Charlene. She was dressed in all black, flaming red hair, and looked stuck a kill. She walked straight to the altar and pointed at my husband, saying, "He's the one." Well, my sister, her jaw dropped, and she became hysterical. She wanted to know what the hell's going on. A police officer stepped forward and put my husband in handcuffs while reading him his rights and telling him that this little game is over. I'll tell you what, this was such a beautiful sight to behold. The wedding decorations just added the glamour and drama. My sister, she starts to cry and refused to let go of my husband, and that was the moment I chose to reveal my face. My husband stopped in his tracks and pointed at me, naming me as an accomplice. Charlene didn't even let him utter another word. She didn't even let him finish his sentence. She immediately said that I was a victim of all this foul play. I cried and asked my husband why he would choose to break my heart twice. I recounted how I mourned him for months only to find out he's still alive and about to get married to my one and only sister. Charlene wasted no time in backing up the story, and I could see the light go out in my husband's eyes. I knew that I won. He was on edge, practically dragging to the car of my sister, who could not believe what was happening and kept holding on to him. She refused to let go. Maybe they both went to the station. I don't know. I don't care. I smiled wider than a Cheshire cat when the police cars finally sped away. All that happened 4 months ago, and I've been living my best life since then. I'm grateful for Charlene, believe it or not. She really understood that I suffered at the hands of Frank, no longer my husband, because the divorce has been finalized and I think I found a friend, Charlene. But I will always prioritize my happiness, and so should you.